They built gods of steel to fight monsters from the deep, but something worse just walked through. The ocean floor cracks under his boots, and every dimension he touches learns the same truth: here to hunt, not to save. So what happens when humanity's war becomes just another graveyard he's passing through? The breach ruptured beneath the Pacific at 0347 hours, and the world did not know it had already ended. Dr. Elena Park stood in the Neural Drift Observatory 300 meters above the Shatterdome floor, her hands pressed flat against reinforced glass that hummed with the resonance of twin reactors firing below. Gypsy Danger descended into deployment position, hydraulics screaming through the cavernous hangar as technicians scattered like insects fleeing divine machinery. The Jaeger was a cathedral of steel and nuclear fire, 80 meters of human defiance wrapped in composite armor that had turned back monsters from dimensions unknown. Its con-pod glowed with the pale blue light of neural handshake protocols engaging, two pilots becoming one mind, one weapon, one prayer against the abyss. She had watched this ritual 217 times. Every launch carried the same weight, the same desperate mathematics of survival. The breach alarm still echoed through her skull, that deep subsonic warning that crawled up from the ocean floor and reminded humanity it was prey. But this time, the mathematics shattered. The seismic sensors registered Category 4 biomass at the breach coordinates, standard kaiju signature expanding through dimensional membrane into baseline reality. Gypsy Danger hit the ocean at terminal velocity, reactors flaring white-hot as seawater vaporized in concentric rings around its entry point. Elena tracked the descent through holographic overlays that painted the darkness in false color and sonar bloom, watching the Jaeger's icon drop toward the pulsing red wound that marked where dimensions kissed and tore. Standard protocol dictated intercept at 2,000 meters, engagement at 1,500, termination before the creature reached continental shelf. The kaiju breached the surface 12 kilometers from San Francisco, a mountain of chitinous horror that dragged half the ocean with it as it rose. Otachi class, the computers named it, already cataloging bioluminescent patterns and toxin signatures before its roar had finished echoing across the bay. Gypsy Danger met it in the shallows where the seafloor dropped away into trenches older than human memory, and the battle began with the thunder of fists against flesh that had never known terrestrial physics. Elena barely watched the engagement. Her attention had locked onto something else, something the sensors had almost missed in the chaos of deployment and combat telemetry. A second signature. Not kaiju, not dimensional bleed, not any classification the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps had ever encountered. The breach was still open, its edges ragged with precursor mathematics and exotic energy that defied human understanding. Through that wound in reality, something else emerged. The sensors caught it for 3 seconds before the readings collapsed into corruption and static. A humanoid mass less than 2 meters tall registering thermal output equivalent to a tactical nuclear detonation and electromagnetic interference that blanked every instrument within a kilometer radius. Elena's breath stopped. The figure fell through 1,200 meters of ocean darkness, trailing superheated plasma that turned seawater to steam in a column that reached the surface like a pillar of divine wrath. It hit the seafloor with kinetic force that registered on seismographs in Tokyo, and the shockwave killed everything living within 500 meters. When the turbulence cleared, the sensors found it again, walking, not swimming, walking across the ocean floor toward the breach, each step measured and purposeful, moving through pressure that would crush steel like paper. The armor it wore burned with light that had no place in the deep, dark green luminescence that seemed to devour shadow and water alike. In its hands, weapons of impossible design, a double-barreled instrument of annihilation that thrummed with contained fury, and upon its back, mechanisms that whispered of technologies older and angrier than anything humanity had dreamed. Elena activated emergency protocols with shaking fingers, routing the feed to Marshal Stacker Pentecost's command station. The old soldier appeared in holographic projection, his face carved from stone and discipline, eyes that had seen the world end a dozen times and dragged it back from the brink through sheer refusal to yield. "Dr. Park," he said, voice carrying the gravel of a man who had stared into the neural abyss and returned changed. "Gypsy Danger has the kaiju contained. What requires my attention?" She could barely form words. "Sir, there's something else. Something came through the breach with the kaiju. It's not biological. It's not mechanical. I don't know what it is, but it's heading back toward the rift." Pentecost's expression did not change, but his eyes narrowed by a fraction that spoke volumes. "Show me." The holographic display shifted, rendering the ocean floor in composite sonar and radiation mapping. The figure registered as a white-hot core of impossible energy, a star burning in the deep, leaving footprints in bedrock that glowed with residual heat for long seconds after it passed. It moved with terrible purpose, ignorant of the battle raging kilometers above, focused on something human instruments could not perceive. "What is its heading?" Pentecost asked, each word precise. "Directly toward the breach, sir. Not deviating, not slowing." Elena's fingers danced across haptic interfaces, pulling data streams that made no sense. "Thermal output is increasing. Whatever it's carrying is charging. I'm reading energy signatures that match kaiju bioelectric patterns, but the intensity is wrong. It's too concentrated, too controlled." Above them, transmitted through a dozen relays and satellites, Gypsy Danger drove its elbow rocket into the kaiju's skull with force that sent shockwaves across the bay. Monster blood sprayed in bioluminescent arcs, painting the water in toxic blue that would poison the coastline for months. The creature thrashed, claws raking across composite armor that held, barely, as pilots Raleigh Beckett and Mako Mori fought the neural load of controlling 80 tons of weaponized human will. The figure on the ocean floor did not look up, did not acknowledge the battle of titans overhead. It walked through the shadow of their war as if they were children playing at violence, irrelevant to its purpose. Then it reached the breach. The dimensional rift pulsed with alien mathematics, a wound in space-time held open by technology and intent from a universe that hungered for Earth's resources and had calculated humanity's extinction with cold precision. Precursor science had carved this pathway through the skin of creation, had engineered biological weapons to terraform a world for their eventual harvest. The breach was their masterwork, their declaration of dominance over dimensions they considered livestock pens. The figure raised its weapon toward the rift and fired. The ocean itself screamed. Light erupted from the double-barreled instrument in a beam of pure annihilation, a lance of energy that did not merely burn but unmade, that touched matter and convinced it to cease existing in protest. The beam struck the breach's edge, and reality convulsed, dimensional membranes peeling back like burned flesh, revealing geometries that violated human comprehension. The rift shuddered, its carefully maintained stability fracturing under assault from forces the precursors had not anticipated. Because this was not human technology, not kaiju bioelectric discharge, not any weapon from this dimension. This was something older, something forged in furnaces of pure rage, tempered in blood and sanctified through eternal war. Elena watched as the figure lowered its weapon, the ocean boiling around it in a sphere of superheated water that rose toward the surface in a thermal column visible from orbit. Through the breach, through the wound in reality that connected Earth to the Antiverse and the Precursor Empire beyond, shapes moved. Not kaiju, smaller, faster, intelligent in ways the biological weapons were not. The Precursors had noticed, they sent through their own. 3 of them, masters of flesh-crafting and dimensional science, beings who had conquered 17 worlds and reduced them to raw materials for endless expansion. They emerged from the breach in shells of synthetic matter wrapped around consciousness that processed reality through frameworks of pure mathematics and hunger. Each stood 3 meters tall, their forms suggesting humanoid structure twisted through alien aesthetic, draped in technologies that bent light and probability. They registered the intruder. They calculated threat assessment. They made their first and final mistake. The figure moved. Elena's instruments caught the beginning of the motion, the microscopic shift in stance that preceded violence, but the conclusion happened faster than sensors could track. One moment the figure stood before 3 precursor avatars, the next it was among them, and what transpired in those 3 seconds defied every law of physics Elena had spent 15 years studying. The double-barreled weapon fired point-blank into the first precursor's core, and the creature's exotic matter shell simply ceased to be. No explosion, no gradual dissolution. One instant present, the next erased from reality so completely that even its constituent atoms forgot they had once been assembled. The second precursor raised appendages crackling with dimensional shear weapons designed to cut through the fabric of space-time itself. Attacks that had carved Jaegers into geometric fragments and left pilots screaming in neural feedback loops. The figure caught the attack on armor that blazed brighter in response, Praetor's suit drinking the dimensional energy and converting it to fury, to fuel, to ammunition for weapons that had ended gods. It raised one armored fist and brought it down on the precursor's skull with force that cracked bedrock and sent seismic shockwaves propagating through oceanic crust. The alien's head pulp, synthetic matter, and incomprehensible consciousness reduced to debris that the ocean claimed immediately. The third precursor attempted retreat, processing probability matrices that suddenly included its own extinction as viable outcome. It dove back toward the breach, toward safety beyond dimensions, broadcasting distress protocols in languages older than Earth's sun. The figure raised its left arm, and from a mechanism mounted there, a blade of pure plasma erupted, green fire that burned with heat stolen from stars and shaped into edge and purpose. It hurled the blade with precision that suggested infinite practice, infinite repetition, infinite wars fought across infinite hells. The blade struck the fleeing precursor between what served as shoulder blades and punched through its torso to emerge from its chest in a spray of exotic fluids. The creature convulsed once, twice, then collapsed, its form already beginning to dissolve as the plasma consumed it from inside. Silence returned to the ocean floor. The figure stood among the remains of the precursor vanguard, armor still blazing with that terrible green light, weapons cooling but ready, posture suggesting not exhaustion but eternal readiness. For 3 seconds it remained motionless, and Elena realized with mounting horror that it was thinking, processing, calculating, hunting. The breach pulsed behind it, and through that dimensional wound, the precursors on the far side finally understood what had happened. Their instruments had registered the deaths of 3 of their kind, had measured the signature of weapons that should not exist in this dimension, had detected energies that matched nothing in their databases, spanning 17 conquered realities. They sealed the breach. Dimensional membranes slammed shut with force that registered on every seismograph on the Pacific Rim, the rift collapsing inward as precursor technology worked frantically to sever the connection between dimensions. They cut themselves off from Earth, abandoned their kaiju programs, sacrificed their foothold in this reality, because what had come through was worse than losing a world. The breach winked out of existence, leaving only churning water and residual exotic particles that would confuse scientists for decades. The figure stood alone on the ocean floor, denied its prey. Above, Gypsy Danger finished the kaiju, driving a plasma cannon through its skull and ending the creature's rampage in a spray of toxic blue that would haunt the bay for years. Pilots Beckett and Maury felt the neural handshake release, felt themselves become separate again, 2 minds where for glorious terrible minutes they had been one. Below, the figure began to move again. Not toward the surface, not toward the Shatter Dome, or the cities beyond. It walked deeper, toward the trenches where darkness was absolute and pressure made steel weep, following a heading that Elena's instruments could not predict or explain. It moved as if it knew something, as if the ocean held secrets beyond human discovery, as if it hunted prey in waters that had never known light. Elena watched it disappear from sensors, the thermal signature fading into background noise, the electromagnetic interference bleeding away until only standard readings remained. She stood in the observatory, hands still pressed against glass that had gone cold, staring at screens that showed nothing but empty ocean and a world that did not yet understand it, had been saved by something passing through. Marshal Pentecost appeared beside her, silent, his reflection in the glass older than it had been minutes before. "What was that?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Pentecost did not answer immediately. He watched the screens, watched the empty ocean, watched Gypsy Danger surface 3 kilometers away in a fountain of displaced water and reactor steam. "I don't know, Dr. Park," he said finally, "but I believe we just witnessed a breach of different nature entirely, not precursors coming through to our world. Something from somewhere else, passing through theirs to reach ours, or perhaps passing through ours to reach theirs." "It killed them," Elena said. 3 of them. In seconds. The precursors we've been fighting for 12 years, the ones who engineered the kaiju, who brought humanity to its knees. It killed them like they were nothing. Yes. And then it walked away. Into the deep. Like this world didn't matter. Like the war didn't matter. Like we didn't matter. Pentecost's jaw tightened. Perhaps to whatever that was, we don't. Perhaps we are very small, Dr. Park. Perhaps the wars we fight are provincial concerns in a cosmos stranger than we imagined. Perhaps something else is hunting the precursors, and we merely survived being caught in the crossfire. Elena turned to face him fully. "The breach is closed, permanently. I'm reading zero-dimensional instability. Whatever they did, they sealed it from their side. Completely. The kaiju war is over. Because they're more afraid of that thing than they are invested in conquering Earth," Pentecost finished. "They abandoned this world entirely rather than risk another encounter. What do we do?" The Marshal was quiet for a long time. Outside, dawn was breaking over San Francisco, pale light touching a bay still churning with disturbed water and monster blood. Gypsy Danger stood in the shallows like a victorious titan, unaware that its victory was incidental, that the true battle had happened in depths where human eyes could not witness. "We do what we've always done," Pentecost said. "We protect what we can. We prepare for what we cannot, and we pray that whatever walks our ocean floor finds what it's hunting and leaves our world intact in the process." Elena looked back at the screens, at the dark water that hid incomprehensible things, at readings that were already normalizing, already forgetting the impossible energies that had burned there minutes before. Somewhere in the deep, something walked that had made the precursors flee. Something that treated dimensional invasions as obstacles rather than existential threats. Something that hunted with weapons forged in fires Earth had never known. Something wearing armor that burned with light stolen from dead gods. The Doomslayer had entered the Pacific Rim, and the ocean would never be the same. Deep beneath the Shatterdome, in archives that predated the Kaiju War by decades, certain files remained sealed behind encryption protocols that had survived 3 generations of technological evolution. Files that documented anomalies stretching back to the first deep ocean expeditions, to exploratory missions that had found things in the trenches that defied classification or explanation. Structures that were not natural, geometries that were not random, evidence of presences in the deep that had been there long before precursors dreamed of conquest. The ocean kept its secrets well, but it remembered. And now, something walked its floors that the ocean recognized, that ancient darkness knew and feared, that depths themselves recoiled from even as they could not harm. The Doomslayer descended into trenches that had never known human light, into chasms where pressure turned matter, plastic and cold made time meaningless. His Praetor suit compensated automatically, its systems adapted through wars fought in vacuum and gravity wells and dimensions where physics was suggestion rather than law. The ocean was nothing. The darkness was comfort. The isolation was preferred. He had passed through the precursor breach while tracking something else, pursuing a signature that had led him across dimensional boundaries and through realities that had tested even his endurance. The Hell Priests had scattered after his rampage through Sentinel Prime, had fled to corners of creation they believed safe from his reach. They were wrong. They had always been wrong. He had followed one of them through a chain of rifts, each jump taking him further from familiar space, each transition bringing him closer to prey that had earned his particular attention. The priest had come here, to this water world, had hidden in its depths while the precursors waged their petty war on the surface. The signature was clear now, unmistakable, that particular resonance of hell-touched consciousness trying to mask itself in dimensional noise. Close. Very close. The Slayer's visor displayed overlays in green and gold, painting the darkness with threat assessment and ammunition counts, and the steady pulse of his armor's Argent reactor maintaining full charge. The super shotgun hung ready in his grip, shells loaded with compressed demonic essence that had been processed through UAC facilities on Mars before that station's glorious destruction. Each shell contained enough concentrated hatred to punch through reality itself. Each trigger pull was prayer and judgment combined. He walked along a ridge that dropped away into deeper darkness, his boots crushing stone that had been undisturbed for eons. The ocean pressed against his shields with pressure that would have compacted a submarine into a sphere of crushed metal, but the Praetor suit held, drawing power from the assault itself, converting environmental hostility into fuel through mechanisms designed by the Seraphim and improved through endless combat. Then he felt it. The signature flared, suddenly close, and the Slayer's threat assessment systems painted the water ahead with warning overlays. Not the Hell Priest. Something else. Something the priest had awakened or allied with in his desperation. The creature that emerged from the deeper trench was massive beyond human comprehension, a thing of tentacles and eyes and flesh that had evolved in darkness and learned to hunger with patience spanning millennia. It had been old when the precursors first discovered this dimension, had been ancient when Earth's oceans formed. The kaiju were children compared to this, crude biological tools beside primordial horror. The Slayer raised his weapon. The creature struck with appendages that moved faster than its size suggested possible, limbs that displaced water in shockwaves powerful enough to trigger tsunamis. They wrapped around the Slayer's form, attempting to crush, to squeeze, to destroy through sheer applied force backed by muscle that had lifted landmasses. The Praetor suit's energy shields flared brighter. The Slayer pulled both triggers. The super shotgun roared even underwater, physics bending to accommodate fury that refused containment. The twin barrels erupted with shells that punched through water and tentacle and ancient flesh with equal ease, boring holes through mass that closed too slowly to prevent the explosions that followed. Concentrated Argent energy detonated inside the creature's body, and the resulting eruption turned a 100-meter radius into churning chaos of flash-boiled water and disintegrating biomass. The creature screamed, a sound that propagated through the ocean as infrasonic horror, a cry that reached the surface and made whales flee in panic, that registered in Shatterdome sensors as seismic event without explanation. It thrashed, limbs convulsing, trying to retreat back into the safety of the deep trench from which it had emerged. The Slayer would not permit retreat. He activated the Praetor suit's jump jets, ancient technology married to Argent principles, and launched himself at the creature with acceleration that turned water to plasma in his wake. The distance closed in microseconds, and then he was on it, against it, his armored fist driving into flesh that had never known true pain before this moment. He climbed its surface like terrain, each handhold a new wound, each foothold a crater blasted into ancient muscle. The creature tried to dislodge him, tried everything evolution and eons had taught it, but the Slayer was immune to its poison, unaffected by its crushing grip. Undeterred by the psychic assault, it launched in final desperation. He reached what approximated its head, that cluster of eyes and neural matter that had processed the dark for longer than human civilization had existed. He drew the crucible blade. Plasma erupted in a column of green fire, water vaporizing for 10 meters in every direction as the sword activated. The blade extended to full length, 7 feet of energized death that had cut through the armor of Hell's champions and the shields of Heaven's warriors. It hummed with power that made reality nervous. The Slayer drove it through the creature's skull with both hands, pushing until the blade emerged from the opposite side, until the plasma core was buried in neural tissue that had never known a predator greater than itself. The creature's death was not immediate, but it was absolute. Its systems began shutting down in cascade, ancient organs failing as argent corruption spread through flesh that had no immunity, no resistance, no evolutionary answer. It sank into the trench, body already dissolving, and the Slayer rode it down into deeper darkness, blade still embedded, waiting until the last spasm had finished before withdrawing the crucible. The weapon retracted with a sound like thunder translated into light, and he stood on the corpse as it settled against bedrock that had been exposed to nothing but pressure and time for epochs beyond counting. The Hell Priest's signature pulsed nearby, and the Slayer knew his prey had watched the battle, had seen what happened to things that stood between hunter and hunted. He began walking again, leaving the corpse behind, following the signature deeper into the trench where light was myth and sound was distorted beyond meaning. The ocean's primordial horrors learned quickly. The next massive shape that detected his approach fled immediately, diving deeper, seeking depths even its biology struggled to tolerate. The Slayer let it go. It was not his prey. He had come for the priest, and he would take him in this world or the next. The trench walls narrowed as he descended, kilometers of rock pressing close, funneling him toward a point where tectonic forces had exposed chambers that should not exist in natural formation. The signature grew stronger, and with it came something else, a resonance he recognized from Mars, from Hell, from a dozen dimensions where demonic presence had left its mark. A summoning chamber. The Hell Priest had established a foothold here, in Earth's ocean, using geometry and sacrifice to open a different kind of breach. Not precursor technology, but older principles, darker mathematics, rituals that predated the Sentinels and would persist after stars burned cold. The signature bloomed into full clarity, and the Slayer's visor painted the chamber entrance in warning red. He entered without slowing. The chamber was vast, a natural cave system expanded through demonic industry, walls carved with glyphs that hurt to perceive, floors marked with circles of power drawn in the blood of things that had died screaming. In the center, surrounded by artifacts and burning braziers that consumed no fuel but malice itself, stood the Hell Priest, Ranak, the last of his kind after the Slayer's rampage through Sentinel Prime, after Grav and Nilox had fallen to righteous fury. Ranak had fled furthest, had hidden deepest, had thought himself safe in a dimension the Slayer could not reach. He had been wrong on every count. The priest wore robes of flayed skin and metal, his form twisted through dark blessings into something between humanoid and nightmare, eyes burning with power siphoned from souls uncounted. He looked upon the Slayer with recognition and terror combined, and when he spoke, his voice carried across water and dimension alike. "Slayer," Granak said, each word an obscenity wrapped in false civility. "You have come far, too far. This world is not yours to judge. These waters are not Hell's domain. You exceed your authority." The Slayer said nothing. Words were wasted on the damned. Granak gestured, and the glyphs on the chamber walls flared bright with power drawn from the sacrifices he had performed, from the rituals he had enacted in preparation for this moment. He had known the Slayer would come, had prepared accordingly, had summoned guardians. They emerged from the shadows, from the spaces between stone and water, beings that had been twisted in Hell's forges and tempered in blood. Hell Knights, 4 of them, each standing 3 meters tall, muscle and bone wrapped in armor that was part of their bodies, fused through agony and dark blessing into living weapons. They moved with terrible grace, cybernetic enhancements grafted to demonic flesh, weapons integrated into arms that ended in blades of superheated metal. Behind them, larger, a Baron of Hell stepped into the dim light cast by burning braziers. This was Old Fury given form, one of Hell's champions, a creature that had broken armies and shattered cities. Its horns scraped the chamber ceiling, its claws carved furrows in stone, its roar shook water and made the ocean itself recoil. The Slayer assessed the threat in microseconds. He had killed hundreds of their kind. He began with the Hell Knights. The first one lunged with speed that belied its mass, cybernetic legs launching it across the chamber in a leap that closed 20 meters in a heartbeat. The Slayer sidestepped, minimum necessary movement, and brought the super shotgun to bear as the creature passed. Both barrels discharged into its midsection at point-blank range, and the knight's torso disintegrated, upper and lower body separating in a spray of demonic ichor that burned the water where it dispersed. The second and third came together, coordinated, trying to flank and overwhelm through combined assault. The Slayer dropped the shotgun, letting it hang on its tether, and activated the equipment launcher mounted on his shoulder. The device tracked both targets simultaneously and fired a cluster of fragmentation rockets that filled the space between them with overlapping explosions. Armor shattered, flesh tore. The knights screamed in frustration and pain, wounded but not dead, still advancing. The Slayer met them with melee fury. The crucible blade ignited in his left hand while his right formed a fist wrapped in praetor plate enhanced through sentinel blessing. He drove the sword through the second knight's chest while his fist connected with the third skull with force that caved in bone and sent the creature staggering. The blade withdrew and swept in a horizontal arc that separated the third knight's head from shoulders, and then there was only one. The fourth Hell Knight had held back, assessing, learning from its brother's failures. It came in low, fast, trying to get beneath the Slayer's guard, claws extended to disembowel. The Slayer caught its wrist mid-strike, armor screaming with the force of arrested momentum, and used the creature's own inertia to spin it, to redirect its attack into the chamber wall with impact that fractured stone and vertebrae alike. Before it could recover, the crucible punched through its spine and out its chest, and the Hell Knight went limp, nerves severed, body already beginning to dissolve. The Baron of Hell had watched all this in 3 seconds. It had seen its lesser brethren fall like wheat before the scythe. It had witnessed efficiency that bordered on divine, violence so perfected it became art. The Baron knew what it faced. Every demon knew. The stories had spread through Hell's hierarchies like plague, whispered in the dark places where even damned things feared. But the Baron had been commanded by D. Granach, and it would die before it disobeyed. It charged with a roar that made the ocean boil, claws extended, mouth open to unleash hellfire that would melt stone and flesh alike. The chamber floor cracked under its weight, water displaced in shock waves that battered the walls. It brought down both fists in an overhead smash designed to pulverize, to obliterate, to end. The Slayer jumped. Praetor suit jets flared, and he launched himself upward, over the descending strike, arcing above the Baron's head. In mid-flight he holstered the crucible and drew the ballista from his back, the weapon materializing from subspace storage where it waited always ready. The ballista charged in a fraction of a second, argent capacitors flooding the firing chamber with compressed destruction, and the Slayer pulled the trigger at the apex of his jump. The bolt struck the Baron between the eyes. The explosion was not fire or concussion. It was argent energy finding demonic flesh and rendering judgment, the two forces incompatible on fundamental levels, creation and corruption colliding in violent rejection. The Baron's head evaporated. Its body stood for one confused moment, then collapsed, falling forward with impact that cracked the chamber floor and sent water surging in waves that reached the ceiling. The Slayer landed atop the corpse, already stowing the ballista, already drawing the super shotgun again, already advancing on D. Granak, who stood in the center of his summoning circle with fear finally overwhelming the arrogance. The priest raised his hands, power crackling between his fingers, prepared to unleash the rituals he had held in reserve, the final curses that might, possibly, slow the Slayer enough for escape. His mouth opened to speak the words of power, to invoke authorities older than the ocean. The Slayer fired both barrels into D. Granak's chest. The shells struck dead center, argent-loaded rounds punching through the priest's defensive wards like they were made of vapor and suggestion. The priest's torso cratered inward, ribs shattering, organs pulping, the dark blessings that had sustained him failing all at once. He staggered backward, disbelief in his burning eyes, hands coming up to clutch at wounds that were already fatal. "Impossible," D. Granak whispered, blood bubbling from his lips. "I was promised. We were promised. Hell's covenant, the Dark Lord himself. We cannot fall. We are eternal." The Slayer reloaded, the action smooth and practiced, shells clicking into chambers with mechanical precision that spoke of repetition beyond counting. "The Slayer," the priest continued, voice fading. "The unchained predator, the Hellwalker, doom itself given form. We thought, we believed, we could run far enough, hide deep enough. But there is no distance, no depth. You will hunt us to the edge of creation, won't you?" The Slayer said nothing. He pulled both triggers again. D. Granak's head disintegrated, and with it, the last of the Hell priests ended. His body collapsed into the summoning circle, blood mixing with the ritual components, tainting them, breaking the geometric perfection required for infernal invocation. The glyphs on the walls flickered and died, their power source severed, their purpose nullified. The Slayer stood in the chamber of failed rituals and broken demons, water settling back to stillness around him, the ocean reclaiming space briefly occupied by Hell's influence. His armor's systems registered mission complete, target eliminated, threat neutralized. The priest was dead. The summoning site was defunct. The demons were scattered ash in water that would dilute them to nothing. He turned to leave, then paused. His senses detected something new, a presence approaching the chamber from above, from the direction of the surface. Multiple contacts, human scale, moving with purpose and coordination. Jaeger signatures. Gypsy danger, specifically, descending toward his position with reactor output suggesting active combat protocols. They had detected the battle, had tracked the energy discharges, were coming to investigate what their instruments called an unknown hostile. The Slayer considered this for exactly 2 seconds. He activated his suit's stealth protocols, rendering himself invisible to sensors and optics alike, a ghost wrapped in bent light and EM silence. When the Jaeger arrived, its pilots would find only an empty chamber, demon corpses already dissolving, and questions they could never answer. He moved past the incoming machine with meters to spare, his passage undetected, a specter in the deep that human technology could not perceive or comprehend. The Jaeger entered the chamber behind him, its plasma cannon charging, pilots scanning for threats that no longer existed. The Slayer continued his ascent, moving back toward shallower waters, his mission in this dimension complete. The Hell Priest was dead. The demonic foothold was cleansed. The ocean could return to its wars without infernal interference. But as he climbed through the darkness, something else registered on his sensors. Faint, distant. Another signature, not demonic but familiar in different ways. Argent resonance, but corrupted, twisted through technology that reminded him of the UAC's darkest experiments. It came from the north, from a different part of this ocean, from a location his visor tagged and stored for later investigation. This world had been touched by Argent energy before. Someone had been conducting experiments. Someone had been playing with forces they did not understand. The Slayer filed this information away and continued rising through water that grew incrementally brighter as he approached the zone where sunlight penetrated. He could investigate later, could follow this new thread after dealing with more pressing concerns across dimensions. The signature was dormant, not actively threatening. It could wait. Gypsy Danger emerged from the trench minutes after he passed, its pilots reporting finding a chamber of inexplicable carnage, demon-like creatures dead and dissolving, ritual markings on walls that hurt to look at. PPDC command ordered full documentation, ordered samples retrieved, ordered the site sealed pending further investigation. They would find nothing useful. Demon tissue dissolved too completely. The glyphs faded once photographed. The chamber itself collapsed 3 days later in what seismologists called a natural tectonic event. The ocean kept its secrets, and the Slayer moved on. Dr. Elena Park sat in her quarters aboard the Shatterdome, unable to sleep, reviewing footage that officially did not exist. She had copied the sensor logs before they were sealed, had isolated the signature of the armored figure walking the ocean floor, had analyzed every frame of the 3-second engagement with the precursors. The data made no sense. Energy output beyond any reactor humanity had developed. Movement patterns suggesting neural response times 500% faster than human baseline. Weapons that operated on principles her physics background could not begin to explain. And the armor itself, that impossible suit that had walked through pressure and temperature extremes that should have killed anything organic or mechanical. She pulled up the clearest image, enhanced through every filter and algorithm available. The figure stood in profile, one arm raised, weapon firing. The armor blazed with green light that her analysis suggested was not reflected illumination but internal emission, as if the suit itself generated the radiance. The design was utilitarian and ornate simultaneously, every surface serving function while suggesting aesthetic born from culture she could not identify. On the helmet, visible for exactly 4 frames before motion blur obscured it, was a marking. She isolated it, cleaned it, enhanced it until pixels resolved into something that might have been symbol or might have been damage. It looked almost like a seal or a brand, a declaration in visual language that suggested authority beyond military rank or national affiliation. The mark of something that hunted demons. Elena saved the image with shaking hands, encrypted it with protocols that would survive her death, and sent it to 3 locations she trusted. If she disappeared, if the PPDC silenced her, if this information needed to surface later, it would. Then she opened a new file and began documenting everything she knew, everything she had witnessed, everything the sensors had recorded. She wrote for 3 hours, pausing only when exhaustion forced her fingers still, and when she finished, the document contained 1,400 words describing the impossible. She titled it, "The Entity, First Contact Report." Then she encrypted it and went to bed, knowing sleep would not come easy, knowing the world had changed in ways the PPDC did not yet comprehend. In the morning, Marshal Pentecost called her to his office. He sat behind a desk that had seen years of crisis management, of decisions made with incomplete information and impossible stakes, of wars fought with resources that were never enough and time that was always too short. He looked at her with eyes that suggested he had not slept either, with an expression that confirmed he knew exactly what she had done. "Dr. Park," he said quietly, "I need you to delete everything you copied. Every file, every image, every analysis." Elena's breath caught. "Sir, that data is vital. We need to understand what we encountered. What if it comes back? What if there are more of them?" We can't just pretend it didn't happen. We are not pretending it didn't happen, Pentecost replied, each word careful. We are acknowledging that we are not equipped to understand or respond to what happened. That entity disabled 3 precursors in seconds. It walked our ocean floor as if pressure and darkness were irrelevant. It fought creatures in the deep that our instruments barely registered, and then it left. Do you understand what that means? It means we're outclassed. It means we're beneath notice. Pentecost corrected. It means that whatever war that creature fights, whatever conflict it pursues, we are not participants. We are scenery. And I will not risk making humanity relevant to something that powerful, something that violent, something that clearly has no interest in our survival or extinction. Elena leaned forward. But what if we need to understand it? What if the precursors come back and we need that kind of power? The precursors are gone, Dr. Park. They sealed the breach from their side, completely, permanently. Our dimensional scientists confirm 0 instability, 0 resonance, 0 possibility of breach reformation. They fled this dimension entirely, and I believe they did so because that entity proved this world was not worth the risk. Pentecost's expression softened fractionally. We won the war, Doctor. Not through Jaegers or courage or human tenacity. We won because something worse than the precursors passed through, and they decided they would rather abandon a world than face it again. That's not victory, Elena said. That's survival by accident. I will take accidental survival over heroic extinction, Pentecost replied. Every time, without hesitation. Now delete the files, Doctor. That is an order. Elena sat in silence for a long moment, then nodded. She pulled out her tablet, navigated to the secured partition, and executed the deletion protocol. Files vanished, wiped at quantum level, irretrievable. Pentecost watched the progress bar complete, then nodded. Thank you, Dr. Park. You are dismissed. She stood, turned toward the door, then paused. Sir, if it comes back, if we encounter it again, what do we do? Pentecost did not answer immediately. He looked past her, toward windows that showed the Shatterdome floor and the Jaegers standing ready, 80-meter titans that had saved humanity and were now obsolete in ways they could never comprehend. We stay out of its way, he said finally, and we pray it has no reason to notice us. Elena left the office, the door sealing behind her, and as she walked through corridors toward the neural drift lab, she felt the weight of knowledge she could no longer prove, of truth she could not share, of reality that had expanded beyond human relevance. But in her encrypted files, in locations Pentecost did not know about, the data still existed, the images, the analysis, the truth. Because Elena Park was a scientist first, and scientists did not destroy data, no matter who ordered it. The ocean kept its secrets, but so did she. 6,000 kilometers away, in research facility built into Pacific Coral Reef, 300 meters below the surface, Dr. Ichiro Geisler woke from a nightmare screaming about green fire and armor that judged the world and found it wanting. Newt, as his colleagues called him, was PPDC's lead kaiju biology expert, the man who had drifted with a kaiju brain and survived, who had touched the hive mind and returned changed. He understood the neural structures that connected kaiju to precursors, understood the telepathic web that spanned dimensions. And through that web, in the moment before it severed completely, he had felt something else. Something that had touched the precursor consciousness and burned it, that had walked through their collective awareness like a titan through a city of paper, that had made the vast alien intelligence recoil in primal terror. He sat in his bunk, sweat-soaked sheets tangled around his legs, hands shaking, the phantom sensation of that presence still echoing in his mind. It had been massive and singular, consciousness compressed into a single point of absolute focus, a mind that knew only hunt and kill and would pursue its prey across creation itself. Newt had felt that presence look at the precursors and dismiss them as irrelevant. had felt it categorize them as obstacles rather than enemies, had witnessed the moment when they chose flight over fight and sealed every breach simultaneously. He stumbled to his workstation and brought up the neural drift logs, searching for the timestamp when the connection had severed. There, a spike in dimensional resonance, a flare of energy that had propagated through the precursor hive mind like lightning through water, and then sudden absolute silence as every connection terminated. Newt enhanced the spike, analyzed its signature, tried to understand what kind of consciousness could burn through telepathic links designed to span universes. His equipment returned error codes. The energy signature matched nothing in human or precursor databases. It was alien in ways that suggested not just different species but different rules, different physics, different foundational principles of reality. He tried again, using modified algorithms, approaching the data from angles his colleagues would call insane. The results suggested the signature was not biological, not technological, but something in between, or beyond, or before such distinctions became meaningful. Organic matter, enhanced through mechanisms that bent space and energy and thought into unified purpose. A fusion of flesh and faith and fury. Newt saved his analysis, encrypted it, and sent a message to Dr. Hermann Gottlieb, his colleague and frequent antagonist, asking if the mathematician had detected any anomalies in the dimensional mathematics during the breach closure. The reply came back in 14 minutes. Yes. Something violated the precursor theorems. Something rewrote their equations. I cannot explain it. The mathematics literally do not work unless we assume the presence of an impossibility. Newt stared at the message, then typed back, "What kind of impossibility?" Hermann's response was immediate. "A force that should not exist in our dimensional framework. Energy that operates according to principles our physics cannot accommodate. I would call it supernatural if I believed in such things. But the data insists. Something walked through our reality that does not belong to our set of universal constants." Newt sat back in his chair, mind racing, trying to connect pieces that refused to fit together through conventional logic. What could terrify the precursors? What could make beings who had conquered 17 dimensions retreat from a single world? What walked like a man but registered as a natural disaster? What killed like a god but hunted with mortal purpose? The questions circled his thoughts, unanswerable, maddening, fascinating. He opened a new file and began documenting everything, every sensation from the neural drift, every data point from the analysis, every impossible conclusion his research suggested. He wrote for hours, coffee growing cold beside him, the coral reef's bioluminescence painting his workspace in shifting blue light. When he finished, the document was titled Hypothesis: Extra-Dimensional Intervention in the Kaiju War. It was madness. It was career suicide. It was unprovable and unfalsifiable and would get him laughed out of the scientific community. It was also the truth. Newt encrypted it with the strongest protocols he knew and sent it to 3 colleagues he trusted, scientists who understood that the universe was stranger than any human framework could contain. Then he sat in the dark, listening to the ocean press against the facility's walls, wondering if the presence he had felt was still out there, still walking the deep, still hunting prey humanity could not imagine. The coral around the facility began to glow brighter, its natural bioluminescence intensifying, responding to something the sensors could not detect. The light pulsed in patterns that suggested rhythm, that suggested communication, that suggested the ocean itself was trying to warn of something passing through its depths. Newt watched the light show, transfixed, understanding dawning slowly that humanity had been permitted to survive not through strength or worthiness, but through sheer cosmic indifference. They were insects watching titans clash, microbes beneath the notice of beings who fought wars across dimensions. The thought should have been humbling. Instead, It terrified him. Because if something that powerful was hunting in Earth's oceans, what was it hunting? What could flee from such a predator? What horrors existed that required a force like that to pursue them? The coral's light pulsed again, faster, more urgent, and Newt felt the echo of neural drift connections stir in his mind, the residual link to the kaiju hive mind that should have been severed but apparently was not completely. Through that link came sensation. Fear, vast and ancient, the ocean's own awareness reacting to presence it recognized and could not fight. He was still out there, still hunting. And the ocean remembered him from times before human memory, from ages when this world was young and other things walked its waters, from epochs when the deep was contested territory and battles were fought with weapons that reshaped continents. Newt's hands shook as he pulled up geological survey data, searching for anomalies in the Pacific floor, looking for evidence of ancient cataclysms that predated human civilization. He found them. Trenches that were too straight to be natural, formations that suggested massive explosions occurring in patterns, craters that dated to periods when Earth should have been pristine. Evidence of wars fought in the deep, scars in bedrock that told stories no human had been equipped to read. Until now. The Doomslayer had been here before. Perhaps not him specifically, but his kind, his purpose, his eternal war. The ocean floor remembered battles between demons and angels, between hell's expansion and heaven's resistance, between corruption seeking to claim a world and forces that would burn it clean rather than let it fall. Earth was old. The kaiju war was not its first dimensional invasion. The precursors were not the first empire to attempt conquest. They were simply the most recent, and they had learned, faster than most, that this world was protected by something far more terrifying than humanity's Jaegers, something that did not defend but punished, that did not negotiate but executed, that would pursue evil across every dimension creation permitted. Newt saved all the data, every correlation, every impossible conclusion, building a case that no peer review would ever accept, but that his instincts screamed was correct. Somewhere in the Pacific, the Doomslayer walked, hunting, always hunting. Eternal in his purpose, unstoppable in his wrath, unconcerned with the prayers or fears of beings who were not his prey. And humanity would survive by staying beneath his notice, by being too small to matter, by existing in the spaces between his targets and his eternal war. Newt closed his files and sat in darkness, listening to the ocean, feeling the weight of knowledge that should not be possessed, of truth that could not be shared, of reality that had expanded so far beyond human relevance that their greatest victories were footnotes in conflicts they could not comprehend. The coral's light faded back to normal, and in the returning darkness, Dr. Ichiro Geisler understood that the kaiju war had never been about humanity at all. They had simply been in the way when titans clashed. And they had survived by cosmic accident, by being too insignificant to notice, by existing in the margins of something else's hunt. The thought kept him awake until dawn. The Doomslayer surfaced 300 kilometers from any landmass, rising from depths that would have crushed steel, breaking through the waves in a fountain of displaced water that caught sunlight and threw it across the ocean in momentary rainbows. His armor blazed in the light, praetor plate shifting through configurations as internal systems adapted to atmospheric conditions after hours in pressurized darkness. He floated for exactly 17 seconds, scanning the horizon with sensors that painted the distance in tactical overlays and threat assessments. Empty ocean, clear skies, no immediate danger, no active targets. The Hell Priest was dead. The demonic incursion was cleansed. This world could return to its baseline conflicts without infernal interference. But that argent signature still pulsed in his awareness, faint but persistent, a technological echo that suggested someone had been conducting experiments they should not have attempted, working with energies they could not contain. The signature came from a facility northeast of his current position, underwater, shielded but not invisible to sensors designed to detect Hell's influence across dimensional boundaries. The Slayer considered leaving. His mission was complete. The priest was executed. He could return to his broader hunt, could follow other leads across other realities, could continue the eternal campaign against forces that sought to corrupt and consume. But Argent corruption had a way of spreading, of metastasizing, of opening doors better left sealed. If humanity had discovered Argent energy and was experimenting with it, the consequences could spiral beyond this world's ability to contain. He had seen it happen before. Mars, Earth, the Sentinel worlds, always the same pattern: discovery, experimentation, containment, failure, invasion, apocalypse. Better to investigate now than return later to ashes. The Slayer dove again, jets activating, driving him beneath the surface with acceleration that turned water to cavitation, bubbles, and steam. He arrowed through the ocean like a missile, following the heading his sensors provided, covering distance at speeds that would have registered on sonar arrays as impossible contact if any were listening. The facility emerged from the gloom ahead, a structure of reinforced metal and ceramic composite built into coral formations at 300 meters depth. It was small by military standards, perhaps 50 meters across, with bioluminescent panels providing minimal external light and sensor arrays that swept the surrounding water in regular patterns. The Slayer's stealth protocols activated automatically, rendering him invisible to the facility's instruments. He approached from below, moving slowly now, assessing defenses and layout through sensor penetration that mapped the interior in wireframe green. 23 life signs. Human baseline. No demonic presence. No Hell signatures. Just the Argent resonance coming from what his sensors identified as a containment laboratory on the facility's lowest level. He found an airlock, waited for the automated cycle to complete for a supply drone, and slipped inside before the inner door sealed. The corridor beyond was standard underwater habitat construction, pressure-rated, emergency systems visible along the ceiling, oxygen scrubbers humming at regular intervals. The Slayer moved through the facility like a ghost, passing researchers who never looked up from their work, navigating intersections that his sensors had already mapped, heading deeper toward the source of the Argent signature. He found it in a sealed laboratory behind triple redundant security doors. In a containment chamber that glowed with sickly green light he recognized immediately. Kaiju blood, but not ordinary kaiju blood. This had been processed, refined, concentrated through techniques that suggested someone understood the energy-rich properties of the substance and had been working to isolate and amplify them. The result was an Argent analog, not identical, but functionally similar. A power source that bent the same rules through different methodology, and they were using it to power something. The Slayer's sensors identified the device, a neural interface helmet connected to processing equipment that suggested they were attempting to harness the precursor hive-mind connection, to tap into the telepathic network that had linked kaiju across dimensions. The helmet pulsed with energy drawn from the processed blood, creating a feedback loop that his instruments flagged as dangerously unstable. Someone had drifted with kaiju consciousness and survived. Someone had tasted the hive mind and come back wanting more. Someone was trying to reopen the connection even though the precursors had sealed it from their side. The Slayer understood the danger immediately. The hive mind was a dimensional network, a bridge between realities. Even sealed, it carried residual resonance, echoes of alien thought that could attract attention from things worse than precursors. Demons had their own telepathic hierarchies, their own consciousness networks. If someone tried to force open this connection, they might touch something that would answer. Hell was always listening. He moved to destroy the equipment, raising his weapon, targeting the containment chamber and the neural helmet simultaneously. 2 shots. Clean termination. Remove the threat before it metastasized. Then the door behind him opened. Dr. Ichiro Geisler entered the laboratory, coffee in hand, muttering to himself about calibration protocols and dimensional mathematics. He took 3 steps before his brain processed what his eyes were seeing. A figure in armor standing in his sealed lab, weapons raised, stealth protocols failing as targeting systems activated. Newt dropped his coffee. The cup shattered on the floor, liquid spreading in patterns that seemed suddenly very important and very final. The Slayer and Newt stared at each other across 3 meters of laboratory space, separated by understanding that should not exist, by knowledge that bridged dimensions, by the terrible recognition of predator and prey calculating whether violence was necessary. Newt's mind raced through impossible speed, connecting data points, matching sensor readings to neural drift memories, correlating the figure before him with the presence he had felt burn through the precursor consciousness. "You," he whispered, voice cracking. "You're the one who killed them, who made them flee, the entity from the breach." The Slayer did not respond, did not lower his weapon, simply stood in absolute stillness, waiting to see if this human would provide reason for execution or would demonstrate sense enough to survive. Newt's hands came up slowly, carefully, in gesture of surrender and supplication combined. "I'm not your enemy. I'm just a scientist. I'm just trying to understand what happened. Why the breach closed. Why the precursors fled. I felt you, in the neural drift, when their consciousness burned. I know what you are." The Slayer's helmet tilted fractionally. Question implicit. "You hunt demons," Newt continued, words tumbling out faster now. "Across dimensions, through realities. You kill them, that's all you do, that's your purpose." And the precursors, they weren't demons, but they were close enough. They had conquered other worlds, had committed genocides across 17 dimensions, and you judged them, found them guilty, executed them through their own network. The weapon did not lower, but the Slayer did not fire either. He was listening, evaluating, determining if this human understood enough to be permitted survival. Newt gestured frantically at the equipment behind the Slayer. "I'm not trying to summon anything. I'm not trying to open new breaches. I just wanted to understand the connection, to map the network while I still could, to document how kaiju consciousness linked across dimensional boundaries. It's research, pure research. No weapons development, no invasion attempts, just knowledge." The Slayer's sensors confirmed the claim. No demonic signatures in the facility, no hell-touched artifacts, no ritual components or sacrificial altars. Just a scientist playing with forces beyond his comprehension, but doing so with academic intent rather than malicious purpose. But ignorant intent still led to hell. The Slayer lowered his weapon fractionally and spoke for the first time. Voice processed through his helmet into grinding mechanical thunder that carried weight beyond words. "Shut it down." Newt nearly collapsed with relief. The entity could speak, would negotiate, might possibly not execute him immediately. "Yes, absolutely. Right now, I'll delete everything, destroy the samples, seal the research." "No." Newt froze, confusion replacing relief. The Slayer continued, each word precise and final. "The knowledge you have gained may prove useful, but the connection must be severed, the samples must be destroyed, the equipment must be dismantled. Telepathic networks attract attention. Hell is always listening." Understanding dawned on Newt's face. "You're saying if I keep using this, if I keep trying to touch the hive mind, something else might answer, something worse than the precursors." "Yes, demons. Worse. Demons are known quantities. Predictable. This network touches dimensions you have not mapped. Consciousness beyond your framework. Entities that will interpret your probing as invitation." The Slayer's helmet turned toward the containment chamber. "Destroy it, now." Newt moved to the control panel with hands that still shook, initiating shutdown protocols that would drain the processed kaiju blood and seal the containment systems. I understand. I'll shut it all down. But please, I need to know what you felt in the hive mind when you burned through it. What did you see? What made the precursors flee? The Slayer watched the containment systems wind down, watched the green glow fade from the chamber, ensuring compliance before answering. They saw hell, he said finally. They saw what happens to empires that attempt conquest through dimensional invasion. They saw the fate of 17 worlds they had harvested, the souls they had condemned, the atrocities they had committed across realities, and they saw me, hunting them, across every dimension, through every reality, until every precursor answers for every death. Newt's breath caught. You're going after them. In their home dimension. In the Entiverse. Yes. They sealed the breaches. All of them. Made it impossible to reach their reality from ours. Temporary obstacle. You're insane. They have entire armies, billions of kaiju in production, technologies that make ours look like stone tools. Even if you could reach them, even if you could survive their defenses, you're one entity against an empire. The Slayer's armor pulsed brighter for a moment, and Newt felt the echo of presence that had burned through the precursor consciousness, felt the weight of fury that had made dimensional conquerors flee in terror. I have ended empires before, the Slayer said. Hell was infinite. Hell had consumed dimensions uncounted. Hell had stood eternal, until I walked its halls, until I broke its throne, until I made hell itself fear. He moved toward the door, mission complete, threat neutralized, ready to depart this facility and continue his broader hunt. Newt called after him. Wait, if you're going after the precursors, if you're hunting them in their home dimension, what about Earth? What about humanity? We were defending ourselves against their invasion. Doesn't that count for something? The Slayer paused, half-turned, helmet reflecting laboratory light in patterns that suggested thought occurring behind layers of armor and augmentation. Your species is not my concern. You fight your wars, I fight mine. They happen to intersect. That is all. But we could help. The PPDC has resources, weapons, knowledge about the precursors. We could coordinate, work together. No. You are outclassed. Your weapons are irrelevant. Your knowledge is incomplete. Your presence would be liability. The Slayer's tone softened fractionally, as close to sympathy as his mission permitted. Survive. Rebuild. Forget I was here. That is how you help. People need to know, Newt protested. They need to understand why the war ended, why the precursors fled. They deserve the truth. The truth will terrify them. It will inspire worship or persecution. Either reaction is unacceptable. Let them believe they won through courage. Let them celebrate their Jaegers and their pilots. Let them think humanity's defiance drove the invasion back. The Slayer turned fully toward Newt now. That belief will serve them better than knowing they survived by accident, by being too small to matter in conflicts beyond their comprehension. Newt wanted to argue, wanted to insist on transparency and scientific integrity and the public's right to know, but looking at the figure before him, at armor that blazed with light stolen from dead gods, at weapons that had ended empires, at purpose that transcended human frameworks entirely, he understood the wisdom in silence. Some truths were too large to be useful. The samples, Newt said instead. The processed kaiju blood. You're sure it needs to be destroyed? We could learn so much from it. It will kill you, the Slayer replied bluntly. The energy it contains is cousin to Argent corruption. It will seem controllable, usable, beneficial, until it is not, until it opens doors, until things come through that your weapons cannot harm. His helmet tilted toward the draining containment chamber. I have seen civilizations fall this way. Prometheus reaching for fire and burning their world. Every time, without exception, destroy it. And if I don't? The Slayer's weapon rose fractionally. Answer implicit. Newt nodded quickly. Right, destroying it. Immediately, total sterilization. Nothing survives. Good. The Slayer moved toward the door again, then paused once more. The knowledge in your mind, the drift memories, the patterns you perceived, those you may keep. Study them, understand them, but do not attempt to recreate them. Knowledge without application can be wisdom. Application without restraint is damnation. Then he was gone, moving through the facility too fast for Newt's eyes to track, already beyond detection, already departed into the ocean that would carry no record of his passage. Newt stood alone in the laboratory, staring at equipment that suddenly seemed very dangerous and very tempting, knowing he held in his mind patterns of thought that spanned dimensions, understanding that would reshape physics, secrets that could elevate humanity or doom it. He made his choice in 17 seconds. The containment chamber received full sterilization protocols. The processed kaiju blood was incinerated at temperatures that broke molecular bonds. The equipment was dismantled and its components scattered to 6 different recycling facilities. The laboratory was sealed and its authorization revoked. Within 4 hours, no evidence remained that the research had ever occurred. Newt sat in the ruins of his work, coffee long cold, and wrote a new document, not research notes, not experimental data, a warning, for himself, for others, for anyone who might be tempted to reach for knowledge that burned. He titled it, On the Danger of Listening to Things That Should Not Answer. Then he encrypted it, stored it in locations that would survive his death, and returned to safer research, to mundane questions about kaiju biology that did not risk attracting attention from dimensions where demons waited. The facility's coral glowed steady and calm, no longer pulsing warnings, the ocean accepting that the danger had passed, that the predator had moved on, that this small corner of the deep could return to normal concerns. In the darkness outside, the Doomslayer descended back toward the trenches, following other signatures, hunting other prey, continuing the eternal war that had no end but accepted no rest. The ocean would keep its secrets, and humanity would survive by never learning them. 3 days later, Marshal Stacker Pentecost stood before the World Security Council, delivering his final report on the Kaiju War. The assembled representatives listened with varying degrees of relief and exhaustion as he detailed the breach closure, the cessation of Kaiju attacks, the apparent precursor withdrawal from this dimension. "And you attribute this victory to the Jaeger program?" asked the Chinese representative, her voice carrying skepticism that 13 years of war had earned. "I attribute it to the combined efforts of every nation represented here," Pentecost replied carefully. "The Jaegers provided the defensive capability that bought us time. The Wall of Life program, while flawed, demonstrated global cooperation. The scientific research gave us understanding of our enemy, and our pilots, our rangers, showed the precursors that humanity would not yield. But the breach closing," the American representative pressed, "the complete and sudden withdrawal, the absolute cessation of attacks, that seems to suggest something beyond our defensive efforts triggered their retreat." Pentecost had prepared for this question, had rehearsed the answer that was true enough to pass scrutiny while omitting the parts that would cause panic. "Our analysis suggests the precursors calculated that Earth's resistance had become too costly to overcome. The Jaeger program, while expensive and difficult to maintain, proved effective at creating a war of attrition the precursors were unwilling to sustain. They likely have easier targets in other dimensions, worlds less defended, resources more easily harvested. They made a strategic withdrawal, cutting their losses." The representatives nodded, accepting this explanation because it fit their frameworks, because it allowed them to claim victory because the alternative was admitting they understood nothing about what had actually transpired. "What about the energy readings Dr. Park reported from the ocean floor?" the Russian representative asked. "The anomalous signatures detected during the final battle? Sensor artifacts?" Pentecost lied smoothly. "Kaiju blood has electromagnetic properties that create false readings during combat conditions. Dr. Park has revised her initial reports to reflect this understanding." Another lie, but necessary, because the truth would inspire questions that could not be answered without revealing how little control humanity had over its own survival. The council debated for another 2 hours, discussing demobilization protocols and budget reallocations, and the transition from war economy to peacetime reconstruction. Pentecost answered their questions with patience he did not feel, providing assurances he could not guarantee, painting a picture of human triumph that was comfortable fiction. When the session finally ended, he returned to his quarters in the Hong Kong Shatterdome and allowed himself exactly 3 minutes of exhaustion before composing himself and moving to the next crisis. There was always a next crisis. But as he worked through reports and requisitions and personnel evaluations, a small part of his mind remained focused on what he had seen in the Neural Drift Observatory, on the footage that no longer officially existed, on the figure that had walked the ocean floor with authority that made precursors flee. Pentecost had fought in the Kaiju War since its beginning, had seen horrors that would break most minds, had made peace with his own mortality through the cancer that radiation exposure had gifted him. He was not easily impressed, was not prone to awe, but he had felt something close to religious terror when watching that armored figure move, when witnessing casual violence that ended dimensional conquerors in seconds, when recognizing that humanity's greatest weapons were toys compared to what walked the deep. He pulled up a classified file, one he maintained personally, updated only by his own hand. The title was simple: Contingencies, Unknown Threats. He added a new entry: Entity Classification, Unknown. Designation: The Entity. Observed capabilities include resistance to extreme pressure and temperature, weapons technology beyond current understanding, combat effectiveness against precursor forces, apparent dimensional travel capability. Threat assessment: incalculable. Recommended response: avoidance. Do not engage. Do not attempt contact. Do not attempt to study or replicate observed capabilities. If entity is encountered again, withdraw all personnel immediately and cede operational theater. Note: entity appears to have no hostile intent toward humanity. Maintain this status through non-interference. He saved the file, encrypted it with protocols that would survive his death, and ensured it would pass to his successor when the cancer finally claimed him. Then Stacker Pentecost closed his eyes and allowed himself to wonder, just for a moment, what wars were being fought in the spaces between dimensions, what conflicts raged beyond human perception, what horrors existed that required a being like the entity to hunt them across creation itself. The questions had no answers he could reach. So he returned to work, to the mundane crises of managing a global defense force that no longer had a clear enemy, to the transition from war to peace that would prove harder than any battle. And in the deep places of the ocean, where light was memory and pressure was absolute, the Doomslayer continued his hunt, following signatures that led him through trenches and caves and spaces where reality grew thin, pursuing prey that had fled through dimensions but could not hide forever. He found them in a cavern 12 kilometers down, where tectonic plates met and the Earth's mantle pressed close to the ocean floor, where heat vents created forests of extremophile life that had never known the surface. Demons. Lesser ones, scouts sent through small rifts that the precursors had inadvertently left open, opportunistic parasites trying to establish foothold in a dimension weakened by dimensional breach. There were 17 of them. Imps, mostly. Quick, vicious. capable of overwhelming unprepared prey through numbers and ferocity. The Slayer killed them in 42 seconds. No ceremony, no hesitation, just practiced violence executed with efficiency that suggested infinite repetition. The super shotgun barked its fury, shells punching through demonic flesh and the water beyond, creating turbulence that spun the cavern into chaos. When the gun clicked empty, the Slayer switched to the crucible blade, plasma burning bright enough to turn the cavern into temporary daylight, sweeping through demonic bodies with cuts that left no time for regeneration. The last demon tried to flee back through the rift it had emerged from, a tear in space barely large enough for a child to pass through. The Slayer caught it by the leg, dragged it back through against its shrieking protests, and executed it with a single shotgun blast to the skull. Then he sealed the rift. The crucible blade activated at full power, its plasma field extending to surround the dimensional tear. The Slayer drove the sword through space itself, cutting the rift's edges, cauterizing the wound in reality with argent fire that made dimensional boundaries shriek and solidify. When he withdrew the blade, the rift was gone, sealed so completely that not even microscopic tears remained. 17 demons terminated. 1 rift closed. This section of ocean floor secured. The Slayer holstered his weapons and consulted his armor's dimensional scanner. 3 more minor rifts registered within a 100-kilometer radius, all recent, all small, all exploiting the same dimensional weakness the precursors had created through their larger breach. He began walking toward the next signature, boots crushing stone that had been ancient when dinosaurs walked the earth, following a heading that would take him to rift after rift, demon pack after demon pack, systematically purging hell's opportunistic infection from a world that had no idea how close it had come to true invasion. The Kaiju War had been planetary conquest. Calculated, methodical, horrible but comprehensible. Hell's invasions were extinction events, not conquest but consumption, not harvesting but annihilation. Every world Hell touched became hell, every dimension it corrupted ceased to be anything else. It did not make slaves, it made suffering, and it expanded eternally, voraciously, toward any weakness it could exploit. The precursors had fled because they had touched the Doomslayer's awareness and realized their empire was next, that he would hunt them through the Antiverse and execute them for crimes spanning 17 worlds. They had chosen abandonment over annihilation, but their dimensional breaches had weakened Earth's barriers, had created opportunities for other things to slip through, had opened doors that would take months to fully seal. The Slayer would spend those months walking Earth's ocean floors, hunting every demon that tried to exploit the weakness, closing every rift that formed, ensuring that this world survived not just the precursor invasion but the infernal infection that always followed dimensional damage. It was maintenance work, unglamorous, necessary. The kind of labor that saved civilizations while receiving no recognition because success was measured in disasters that never happened. He would do it anyway, because that was his purpose, his mission, his eternal war. Hell would never stop trying, so he would never stop hunting. The ocean pressed against his shields with force that would crush mountains. The darkness was absolute beyond his visor's projected light. The isolation was complete, comfortable, preferred. The Doomslayer walked alone through the deep, and the ocean learned to fear the green light that meant judgment had arrived, that meant demons died and rifts sealed and hell's expansion was denied once more. Humanity above would never know, would never understand how close they had come to fates worse than the Kaiju War, would celebrate their Jaegers and their pilots and their marshals' courage. That was acceptable. Better they believed they saved themselves. Better they felt empowered rather than insignificant. Better they thought the universe operated according to rules they could comprehend. The truth was simpler and more terrible. They survived because something worse than their enemies walked their world. Because Hell's expansion was someone else's eternal war. Because the Doomslayer had passed through and found demons to kill. Everything else was incidental. Including them, the Slayer reached the second rift 3 hours later, found it defended by a Hell Knight and a pack of imps, executed all of them with familiar efficiency, sealed the rift with crucible plasma, and moved on to the next target. The pattern repeated through the day and into the night, through depths where time was irrelevant and distance was measured in pressure zones rather than kilometers. Kill, seal, move, kill, seal, move. The rhythm of eternal war, the beat of endless hunt, the pulse of purpose that transcended exhaustion or doubt, or any consideration beyond the next demon and the next rift and the next threat neutralized. By the time surface world clocks marked 48 hours since the precursor breach closed, the Slayer had terminated 63 demons and sealed 11 rifts. Earth's dimensional barriers were stabilizing. The opportunistic infection was being purged. The crisis that humanity did not know existed was being resolved by a guardian they would never acknowledge. And that was exactly as it should be. The Doomslayer asked for no gratitude, required no recognition, fought not for glory but for execution, not for salvation but for annihilation of that which refused to stop expanding. He was the immune system of reality itself, hunting corruption wherever it appeared, killing it before it could metastasize, moving on before attachment could form. Earth was one world among infinite. Humanity was one species among countless. Their wars were provincial. Their concerns were limited. Their existence was brief, measured against cosmic time. But demons were demons. Rifts were rifts. Hell's expansion had to be stopped, regardless of which world it threatened. So he would walk their ocean floor until the work was done, until every rift was sealed, and every demon was dead, and the dimensional barriers had healed completely. Then he would leave, and they would never know he had stayed. 6 months passed. The world rebuilt. Coastal cities repaired kaiju damage. Economies transitioned from war production to peacetime industry. Jaegers were mothballed or converted to construction equipment. The Wall of Life, that magnificent failure, was dismantled and its materials repurposed. Humanity exhaled collectively and allowed itself to believe the nightmare was over. The Pan-Pacific Defense Corps became a peacekeeping organization, its primary mission shifting from active combat to monitoring dimensional stability and maintaining readiness against theoretical future threats. Jaeger pilots became celebrities, then veterans, then gradually faded from public consciousness as the world moved on to new concerns. Dr. Elena Park continued her research in neural drift technology, applying it to medical and therapeutic purposes now that combat deployment was no longer necessary. She never spoke about the entity she had witnessed, never shared the footage that officially did not exist, never pursued the questions that would have consumed her earlier in her career. She had learned wisdom. Some things were better left unknown. Dr. Ichiro Geisler abandoned his hive mind research completely and turned his attention to kaiju biology for agricultural applications, studying how their rapid growth patterns could be adapted to feed a post-war world. His nightmares about green fire and armor that judged the world gradually faded, replaced by normal dreams about normal fears. He kept his encrypted documents, though, just in case, just as warnings for the future if anyone else grew tempted to reach too far. Marshal Stacker Pentecost served another 8 months before the cancer finally claimed him. He died peacefully, surrounded by colleagues who had become family, secure in the knowledge that the world was rebuilding and humanity had survived. His classified files passed to his successor, Marshal Herc Hansen, who read the entries about the entity and made his own decisions about how to handle knowledge that could not be acted upon. The ocean was quiet. No breaches opened. No kaiju emerged. Dimensional stability remained perfect, showing zero indication of precursor activity or any other extra-dimensional threat. Scientists debated why the invasion had ended so suddenly. Theorists proposed that the precursors had calculated Earth's resistance exceeded profitable margins. Militarists argued that the Jaeger program had proven too effective. Conspiracy theorists suggested dozens of alternative explanations ranging from plausible to absurd. None of them were correct. The truth remained buried in encrypted files and deleted footage and memories that people chose not to share. The truth stayed in the deep places where darkness was absolute and pressure made steel weep. The truth walked with armored boots across ocean floors, hunting demons that tried to exploit weakness, sealing rifts that formed in the wake of dimensional damage. For 6 months, the Doomslayer patrolled Earth's oceans. For 6 months, he executed every demon that attempted incursion and closed every rift that manifested. For 6 months, he served as guardian to a species that did not know he existed and would not have understood his purpose if they had. The work was thorough, methodical, complete. On the 183rd day after the precursor breach closed, the Slayer sealed the last minor rift off the coast of Antarctica, executed the final opportunistic demon trying to establish foothold, and scanned the dimensional barriers with instruments designed by Seraphim and refined through ages of war. Stable, healed, secure. Earth's dimensional integrity had recovered. The weakness was gone. Hell's infection was purged. No immediate threat remained. His mission here was complete. The Slayer rose toward the surface for the final time, emerging 300 kilometers from the nearest shipping lane, breaking through waves into atmosphere that his armor filtered and analyzed and found unremarkable. The sun was setting, painting the ocean in colors that his visor muted to tactical relevance, but which suggested beauty to those equipped to appreciate such things. He floated in the water, armor bobbing with the swells, and accessed the dimensional scanner's long-range capabilities. Across creation, across the spaces between realities, signatures pulsed. Hell priests in hiding, demon lords reforming. Rifts opening on worlds too far away for human instruments to detect. The eternal war continued, as it always had, as it always would. His purpose called from across dimensions. The Doomslayer raised his left arm and activated a mechanism that had been dormant during his time on Earth, a device that drew power from the Praetor suit's Argent reactor and bent it toward purposes no human scientist would recognize as possible. Space folded, dimensions aligned, reality tore with precision rather than chaos. A controlled breach that led not to the antiverse but to pathways between universes, to the spaces where dimensional travelers moved and pursued wars beyond provincial concerns. The rift opened in front of him, green light spilling from its edges, geometries beyond Euclidean beckoning toward continuation of the hunt. Through it, he could see the next battlefield, the next target, the next demon that required execution. He took one last look at Earth's ocean, at the world he had guarded for 6 months without recognition or reward, at the civilization that would survive because he had walked their waters and kept them safe from threats they would never comprehend. Then the Doomslayer stepped through the rift into spaces between realities, and the breach sealed behind him with finality that suggested permanence, with closure that meant Earth's dimensional barriers were strong enough to reject even the Slayer's passage if he attempted return. He would not attempt return. This world was secure. His work here was done. Other worlds needed his attention. Other demons required killing. Other rifts needed sealing. The eternal war accepted no rest, required no home, permitted only hunt. The ocean settled, waves returning to normal patterns, the green light fading from memory. In Shatterdome observatories around the Pacific, sensors registered a momentary dimensional fluctuation too brief and too distant to warrant investigation. The readings were filed as minor anomalies, cross-referenced against tectonic activity, and forgotten within hours. Above the water, a fishing vessel passed through the location where the breach had opened, its crew unaware they sailed across a spot where dimensions had kissed and parted. where a guardian had departed after 6 months of silent service, where Earth had been deemed secure and abandoned to its own devices once more. The fishermen caught their quota and returned to port, discussing weather and market prices and the small concerns of daily life, never knowing they existed because someone else fought wars they could not imagine, because the Doomslayer had passed through their world and found it worth protecting long enough to complete his work. In a dimension far removed from Earth's physics, where space bent according to different principles and time flowed according to alien mathematics, the precursors detected the breach signature and recognized it immediately. The same energy pattern that had burned through their hive mind, the same presence that had made their empire flee. He was traveling again, hunting across dimensions, pursuing them. The precursors sealed another 17-dimensional pathways, cutting themselves off from realities they had been preparing to harvest, sacrificing potential conquests to increase the distance between themselves and the thing that hunted them. Their calculations suggested they had perhaps 3 solar cycles before he found them, before he walked their home dimension and brought judgment for 17 worlds worth of atrocity. 3 cycles to prepare defenses that might slow him, might force negotiation, might permit survival through surrender of everything they had built. They knew it was futile. The hive mind had tasted his purpose, had felt the absolute nature of his mission. He would not negotiate, would not accept surrender, would pursue them until every precursor answered for every death, until their empire was ash and their consciousness was extinct. But they would try anyway, because survival instinct transcended logic, because hope persisted even in the face of certainty, because the alternative was accepting extinction without resistance. The precursors fortified their home dimension and prepared for war, knowing they would lose, praying they were wrong, counting the time they had left in measurements that grew shorter with each calculation. And across the spaces between realities, the Doomslayer walked pathways only he could navigate, following signatures only his instruments could detect, hunting with patience that spanned eternities because his prey could run to the edge of creation and he would follow, because the eternal war accepted no conclusion short of annihilation, because demons and dimensional conquerors and architects of genocide would find no sanctuary while he existed to pursue them. Earth spun through its orbit, unaware and untroubled, rebuilding and recovering and returning to the normal concerns of a species that believed it controlled its own fate. Cities rose from rubble, economies stabilized. Children were born who would never know the kaiju war except through history books and memorial services. The ocean kept its secrets. The deep remembered the green light and the armored figure that had walked its floors, but the ocean did not speak, and humans did not listen, and memory became myth, became legend, became forgotten entirely. In 50 years, scholars would debate whether the kaiju war had ended through human courage or precursor strategic withdrawal. In 100 years, the war would be reduced to historical footnote, significant but not defining. In 200 years, it would be remembered the way ancient wars were remembered, facts divorced from feeling, dates without dread, victories that seemed inevitable in retrospect. The truth would remain buried in encrypted files that degraded with time, in deleted footage that could not be recovered, in memories that died with the people who held them. Better that way. Cleaner. Easier. The Doomslayer had no investment in being remembered, required no monuments or gratitude, fought not for glory but for execution, not for recognition but for completion. He was the anonymous guardian of realities that would never know they were protected, the judge who required no court, the executioner who needed no permission. His work was eternal, his war was endless, his purpose was absolute, and Earth, like countless worlds before it, survived because he had passed through and found demons to kill, because hell's expansion was his to stop, because the eternal war demanded he walk every dimension and purge every corruption and seal every rift until creation itself ended or he fell in battle, that would someday, inevitably, exceed even his capabilities. Until then, he hunted. Always, eternally, without rest. The ocean remembered. The deep remembered. The planet itself held echoes of green light in its bedrock and its trenches and its ancient scars. But humanity forgot, and that was mercy.